All right, welcome back to the pod. Today I have Hal Smith on the pod. Hal is the founder of H Street Digital, a performance advertising agency that helps eight-figure DTC brands unlock 1 million and over monthly e-commerce revenue. He's managed over 150 million in advertising campaigns, which is very significant for e-commerce startups and Fortune 500 companies, and specializes in scaling systems, teams, and companies for profit-focused advertising, which I absolutely love. And he is on a mission to accelerate brand growth through profits focused strategy, forging lasting brands. Hal, welcome to the pod.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
I wasn't just saying those little snippets that I love. I grew up in direct response. I grew up, you have way more ad spend under management than in my experience and career. Uh, but the focus on profitability first, on performance marketing is probably, not only is it, that's where you learn the hardest because it's cutthroat, but I think once you find out what works, you can almost accelerate. I'm not going to say this for any business, but you can pretty much accelerate and find ways to grow nearly any business.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's the hardest advertising can do, especially with digital advertising. Digital advertising gives you a lot of data and insights in terms of your ability to actually execute on more profitable campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think there's a couple ways you can look at this. One is the kind of marketing funnel and how advertising relates to it. The typical funnel is you have awareness type campaigns, you have consideration campaigns, then you have the sales focused campaign. So we're purely focused on lower funnel sales.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy that goes into more upper funnel stuff like awareness is you just go to the client, you're like, hey, what are big brand messages you want your prospective customers to understand about your brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put that into really good looking creative. And then the game you're playing on digital advertising is just where do we place these ads? Can we make sure we spend the budget? And then the metrics you're tracking are basically like impressions, video completion rates, like very simple stuff like that. But in terms of actually justifying that spend and the actual impact on the company and their revenue, it's pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
You can run, brand consideration studies and things like that to give you additional data, but you're just getting the ads and just running them on the ad platforms, and then you let it sit, and then you make sure it spends its budget and you collect some very directional data in terms of its impact. What we do is just extremely tough because you're really tracking on a per ad basis, per campaign, per audience, whatever it might be, like what it's actually driving in terms of real revenue. And then you actually have to dig and really understand the profitability of those product sales for the brand. And so there are two things going on there, but what you're trying to do is maximize profit per unit sold, and then making sure whatever that target customer acquisition cost is allowing you to do that. And then when you go run these ad campaigns, you're making sure like literally for every single dollar we spend, how much revenue is it generating? Is that revenue profitable?
Yeah.
So it's a lot more work on the kind of business analysis side, the reporting analytics side, and then the testing and optimization side, because you have to do a lot of testing very frequently, and you have to be very aggressive about it. You can't let campaigns just run.
It's not set and forget. No,
Yeah.
historically, either myself personally, the teams that I've led and developed, or agencies and stuff, I've only have 25 million under belt. So some experience at that level, but I think one of the key things that you mentioned here are analytics and tracking, which I think we should double click on just briefly because this is a whole rabbit hole in
Yeah.
itself. The second is that you mentioned top of funnel awareness and brand campaigns. I've actually had debates around other brand marketers or agencies around display ads and all these things. Like, yeah, they might work, but if the brand is powerful enough, those are actually nominal in terms of its performance, and you should be focusing primarily on middle of funnel, bottom of funnel approach. What's your take on that? I know it's really hard to say, hey, this video view completion rate, and we've had like 100,000 X impressions. From there, we build more brand affinity. That's something that I can't really currently get my fingers around. I can get more around middle of funnel than bottom funnel conversions and leads and opt-ins and sales on the back end. But what's your approach and philosophy around like the spread of the ecosystem?
Yeah. So I guess my short cop out answer is because of I don't really see the value that much, or I don't understand the impact. We don't do it. So that's why we're focused on lower funnel.
Yeah.
My kind of longer answer to that is so it depends on the value of the brand, how much brand equity exists in the market. So to your point, if the brand is really well known, let's say Coca-Cola, for example, yeah, any advertising you do around that is pretty nominal. So a lot of brand advertising, the intention should be to build up brand equity, just to have more and more of your prospective customers really just recognize the brand, right? And understand a little bit about what you're all about. So I do think for like a go-to-market business, you do have to do a certain amount of brand building. And I think a good example of that recently was Athletic Greens
Hmm.
because, and I didn't know this too, but I think Athletic Greens as a brand has been around for like 15 or 20 years,
Mhm.
maybe longer. And they did a rebrand and they launched with that rebrand and they did a ton of brand advertising and everyone knows Athletic Greens now,
Mhm.
especially in their target customer like demographic. So I think they did a really good job of building up brand equity through brand advertising.
And the
And
trust
that
and
was it. If you,
affinity, because they leverage
yeah.
podcasts primarily, and those pod placements are usually 30K for 6 months or 3 months per show.
Oh, is that what it, yeah. So like Andrew Huberman and Joe Rogan, they definitely, yeah, those, I think those were really good partnerships there,
Yeah. Well, I don't
especially
know how much they're
Huberman's.
charging. I won't put the name out there, but I was gonna place an ad on one of the pods, and they charge around, I think it was 30K for 6 months or something like that. I forgot. It wasn't that crazy expensive, but it's just interesting.
Yeah. But I think the other reason why this brand advertising really works for some types of brands is the type of product or service they sell. So for a lot of services out there, let's say insurance, for example, it's not really a direct response environment where you're selling in. Typically, people will shop for insurance when they have to buy new insurance. And so the idea is you want to have a kind of brand awareness built in that consumer's mind. So when they're ready to make that purchase, you're top of mind for them.
Mhm.
So with that, you do have to have kind of this evergreen, consistent advertising that goes on. And that's just so you're top of mind, right? And so there's certain companies where it's really important to do that. That's why I think like automaker, basically car ads is really important too, because people don't shop new cars that frequently. But when they're ready to buy, you want to make sure that you're top of mind as well. And so there's that kind of piece to it. I would say I ran some pretty big brand awareness campaigns and campaigns where we ran different types of brand studies on it. So it's like brand capability, brand consideration. And frankly, like it's just a massive amount of money you spend. And then the data you get back on these brand study tests is really not that actionable.
Mhm.
It's really difficult. And frankly, I don't really know. That's why I like the direct response performance side of things because it's very clear like what impact you're driving. However, I think as an agency model, it's somewhat better to go on
Oh
the
yeah, the
brand
brand.
side because you have very big budgets and it's a little bit easier to go run those campaigns.
Yeah, no, I've seen behind the scenes. One of my clients, they worked again, can't say the name, but like it's a mall, it's a store in the mall, and they were doing just pure brand. It was an incredible amount of spend per quarter, and it was a quarterly push. So that was a pretty exciting thing. But I think also at that level, when you're focusing on brand heavily, there are different things that equal success. It may not always equal performance. It may equal like the brand is seen more, the C-suite or leadership, whoever's running that campaign wants to get promoted. Again, these are just hypotheses, but I've just seen different examples and different avenues. But I really do appreciate and hone in on the performance side. Which platforms are you most comfortable with? Is it all of them, or which ones are you primarily advertising on?
Yeah, so we're doing our spend is on Meta, so I think it's like 5%, and then we have a chunk that's on Google Ads. So Google Ads is like broadly speaking, it's YouTube, Google search, PMax.
Yeah.
So that's accounts for another, I would say 25 to 30%. And then there's a sliver for additional channels. So we've done stuff on Pinterest and TikTok,
Hmm.
except in terms of a scalable channel for direct response, it really is Meta.
Yeah.
Google, like PMax and YouTube can scale to a point, but most of our spends on Meta. And it's funny, I used to think it was maybe just because we had media buyers that were just particularly good on Meta and that's where we're most comfortable. But the more and more other agencies I've spoken to, it just seems like it's the best platform.
Yeah.
It just allows you to scale the DR side the best.
Yeah. The pixel and the algorithm has improved significantly. Tell me, how do you consolidate tracking and reporting? And I think this has been a huge piece in the industry. Either you have to create your own internal internal tracking or leverage external and just create like a data pool. Like how have you like cracked the nut on track? across these different platforms and creating at least 95% accuracy.
Yeah. So I go for 80% accuracy.
I know.
95 is it's tough.
Yeah.
That's but I okay, so there's a couple ways we do it. One is most of our clients are on Shopify. So what opportunities Shopify provides, one is UTM based tracking. So we assign UTMs to all of our ads. So we go into Shopify too and just check that we're getting UTMs coming in from a last click perspective in Shopify. Two is we set up some type of server to server integration with one of these third party apps. So the one we use most with most of our clients is called Elevar, but there are other ones called like Stape is another one. And then Popsicle is another one we've used before. And then we have most of our clients have some type of third party attribution tool.
Mhm.
So that's the Triple Whale or Northbeam. And then we also do our internal reporting that's more of like an MER perspective. So basically what we're doing there is just total spend by each channel, total revenue in Shopify. So we look at it in a couple different cuts. And the reason for this is the reason for last click UTM tracking in Shopify is because that's actual data we can justify. We can say, hey, this is our ad campaigns. We know for sure it drove this amount of revenue. The biggest problem with last click UTM tracking is it actually doesn't reflect what's happening in the account. For example, someone sees a Facebook ad, they hear about the product, they want to make a purchase, but they don't click on that ad and make the purchase, right? They might go to and Google it a couple of days later and go make that purchase. So what we're seeing in Shopify is there's no data associated with Meta. There's no UTMs for Meta, but there's UTMs for Google ads. And so it would be inaccurate to assume that Google actually drove that purchase, right?
Mhm.
So that's why we had to bring in a third party attribution tool like Triple Whale, where it can tie together that attribution and show the Meta and Google work together in driving that purchase. Then on the MER side too, we can take that broader view and just basically look at total ad spend and total revenue and actually see if we're have a good ratio there. So we have to look in a couple different cuts. And I think the server to server tracking has helped us on the attribution side as well,
Mhm.
because it doesn't necessarily improve our reporting from an MER perspective or a UTM perspective, but it does basically aggregate data better for these pixels and then also sends these events back faster to these pixels. So we're able to give more data to these pixels faster and allow them to train better and then get out of their learning phases faster. So it's a
Mhm.
couple of different things that we do, but we found this mix is the most effective.
That's pretty solid. I like your also approach, like the broader view. This is something that I found just again from my experience to be one of the best ways to look at it as an ecosystem is total dollars in, including the team of anything that's related to sales and marketing,
Yeah.
to and total money out. So that's your return on revenue, any invested amount. Because working with CFOs and people at the like at a higher level, are just like forced to see like what's actually coming in and coming out. Just looking at the ecosystem as a whole and seeing how can we continue to grow profitably that way. Again, working with bootstrap companies, that's the only thing I know. One of the things that you mentioned, and I think this is something to not gloss over, is the offer. Because obviously, the offer really accelerates if it's going to tank or scale. What do you look for in either a niche or the offer itself, or in terms of profitability, for you to really be able to do the work that you need to do to scale up a company?
Yeah. It's okay. So I'm going to tell you what we look at for prospective clients first and what we think are good clients to scale. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the product offers. So for clients, what we're looking at, and I think this is pretty true now. So for anyone looking to start an e-com brand, it's good to listen to this. But one is your profitability on your products. So you want to have good margin on your products. And the key thing to look at or to understand here is contribution margin.
Hmm.
And the most simple way of explaining that is like all costs going into actually getting that product to your customer. So that's like manufacturing costs, that's shipping, it's all this stuff that goes into logistics. That's a team that has to fulfill that, whatever it might be. Okay. And then how much margin you're making off of that. And that's your contribution margin. For us, we find that to be really important because within that contribution margin, we have to basically identify our target customer acquisition costs and how much we're willing to pay, right, for a new customer through digital ads. What we like is a ratio where it's basically like 1 to 3. So your CAC is, let's say, $10 and your revenue is $30.
Hmm.
Typically, there's some margin that's good, and that margin's typically around like that pure net profit after you pay us, after you pay the CAC, you're getting like a 20 to 30% net profit off of that. That's good for us. Now, that's one thing. Typically, because of how Meta and Google Ads works, just based on CPMs, estimated click-through rates, estimated landing page conversion rates, we have found that it's really good to have a CAC of, let's say, around $30, an AOV or revenue of around $120 per product.
Mhm.
So companies that have AOVs that are over $100 for whatever products they're advertising for, that's pretty good for digital advertising because you're going to have a CAC of around $30. It's really difficult just based on CPMs and click-through rates to get a CAC less than $30.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we look, purely just numbers. The other thing we look for is the addressable market size, because if your addressable market is relatively limited, you can't actually scale that much at all, because the other idea is within any addressable market, you have about 2 to 3% of people who are ready to buy today.
Mhm.
So you could assume only 2 or 3% of those people are going to buy today on an ads campaign. And it's typically going to be much less than that, but that's how much you can expect to be new customers every day. And so if it's too limited, we just know we can't scale spend to a certain point. And so it's just going to be really difficult to scale into that or scale sales through digital ads. Now, on the offer side, a couple of things that are really important. So one is you have to have some type of urgency on the offer. So it has to be either time sensitive or limited time only, or it has to be based on some kind of marketing event. So like right now, it's like back to school.
Mhm.
So you can like add in something that's, this is a limited time only back to school sale in September 15th. And so you kind of stacking in this urgency, because what we see a lot of times with potential customers and how we do prospecting campaigns is it might actually be a good product for them. They might actually be very interested, but they have to have something to push them over the ledge and
Mhm.
actually get them to make that purchase now versus sitting around and waiting for it. Other things that we found are helpful for an offer is typically what we call like a hero product or a gateway product.
Hmm.
And so really thinking about the one product that you can advertise for that will at least get people in the door. And then you basically re-engage them later on with upsells or cross sells to increase that cart value or AOV or lifetime value if it's like additional promotions. But it's, you have to think about what's some product that is really understandable to the customer, that there's a big need for it, that solves a real pain, and then really use that for or focus on that first in terms of digital advertising, especially when you're prospecting for new customers. Another key thing with the offer is being clear about, and I spoke to this earlier, but the the pain you're solving or whatever type of aspirational goal you're trying to like sell. Sunglasses, they don't really solve a pain, right? That's like a commodity, it's utility. It's like basic sense. However, it makes you look cool. And so it's like, what elements do we really want to advertise around that? That would be really good. That really do speak to the aspirations of the customer and kind of formatting the offer around that. And so within that too, there are just different ways of thinking about the offers and how you present it. So one is like how quickly they can get from their current state to the ideal state, right? Whether it's solving the pain or meeting that aspiration, you want to in the offer state, like the short amount of time it takes them to actually get there. Another thing is the amount of effort it takes. So if they buy your product, it's less effort. Another thing I would say, which is pretty important, is you really want to try to as much like perceived value that the customer would have and stack that into the offer too. So it's like really making it seem like it's a steal, like there's a ton of value in making that purchase. So I think, yeah, those are the key points in the offer. And then there are like tactical things too. The clients always ask us, what percent off should we do? Or should we have a buy one, get one free?
Hmm.
Those things do work and they're good, but it really depends with that on the margins of your products and really trying to figure out profitability of that. So I am like cautious to recommend any specific tactic because it really depends on your actual products you're selling and how profitable they are. You can't just be like, oh, 20% offer works every time, because
Yeah,
for
no.
some
Yeah.
products, that's really bad for it.
That's interesting. So First of all, that was a masterclass on like offers and what to look for and making sure that you have the right margin. So definitely please press pause, replay that, and listen to it again. The one thing that you mentioned in the beginning around angry towards a sense of urgency, how do you get out of the, or maybe you don't, harming the brand equity by always constantly running sales? If it's just, oh, we're discounting this time, you're kind of conditioning people only to buy on sales. How do you balance that out?
Yeah. Okay, it's a really great question because I don't actually like having just constant discounting, constant sales.
Yeah.
However, you can be smart about it where it's not obvious it is constant sales. So that's why I said there's like different marketing events that you can advertise around because all consumers are conditioned around like key events in the calendar year,
Mhm.
like when to go shopping. And so like back to school, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Memorial Day, 4th of July, that's already there. And so it is good to always have some type of offer or sale around that because that's when customers are more primed to do shop. And so it's always good to have that. However, in terms of I would say a more like evergreen promotion strategy or sales strategy, the other stuff there is just like first time customer, like you can have certain sales and deals for that. I would say too, it's not necessary to always have some type of sale or promotion. Like we have clients that don't have any pretty much consistent throughout the year. They only do stuff around Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and it's like their products still sell pretty well. So it's
Mhm.
just like the power of how you're framing that product in the first place too.
But I think the key is also to anchor it towards an event, and you don't have to discount per se, just a discount and take money off the product, but just saying, hey, it's the time. This is the time right now. The time is now. Take action, and it just like
Yeah.
what you mentioned, the probability of that product, reaching their goals or aspirations. Switching gears here, I think scaling agencies in terms of the level of spend that you have, the types of clients that you work with, you got to have a really tight team with really good mindset and approach because performance based isn't for everyone. How did you build the culture around, or what did you build the culture around for your team to be able to withstand that level of, I'm not sure, stress and approach to client results and performance?
The light and as you're running a business, you constantly have to go back and adjust and update. But a couple of things. So one, I learned after I think it's about 7 people, you have to come up with a shared mission, vision, values. And then you also have to have pretty clear culture. Like you have to be intentional about the culture you're making. I think with 7 people, it's a small enough team where you're just all working together and you all have this kind of shared values anyway. But as soon as you start hiring people after that, then you need to have this kind of shared vision and shared values that you're passing down and people are following as well.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I realized is values and culture is just a decision making framework.
Mm-hmm.
And this sounds bad, but it's like everyone thinks about culture. It's, oh, we have like happy hours and we go out to Top Golf every week or whatever it might be. But that's not culture. Like culture is effectively, I have this very clear perspective on how I should operate as a professional service provider and start an agency. And so I need to make sure everyone else at the agency has the same perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so the best way that perspective is defined is your decision making. So if some client comes to me and they give me a certain amount of budget and they're like, how do you want to spend it? Now, like we have a value at H Street called radical transparency. And so it's my personal value. If the client gives me a budget and they ask me how to do it, I will go and try to figure out the best possible way to spend that budget. And if they maybe give me a recommendation that I think is actually pretty bad for them, like I will tell them that because I'll be radically transparent.
Hmm.
So you need to make sure that if you have an employee that has that same decision, they will follow the same decision making process that you will. And I think that's what your culture really is making sure that you really define those things and what's important for how people should act. And then you like really instill that in kind of a decision making process. And so I think the key thing I figured out was I need to have a clear mission in terms of what we're doing. I need to clearly define our values and really distribute it throughout the company and make sure people truly understand it. It's not just like it's posted in a couple of different Slack channels, right? It's people can repeat those values constantly. And the same thing too in the vision. It's mission is like what we do specifically. Vision is like where we're going, like where we see ourselves in the future and what impact we want to make from a brand perspective. And the values is like how we operate every day. And so that was really important. And then I think the kind of lessons around it, one is hiring based off of it is really important, especially your values. And I read this one book called Who
Mhm.
by a guy, I think his name's Jeff Smart. That was really impactful for me in figuring out a good hiring process. And with that comes a tool. It's called the top grading interview process. And so we make sure all of our candidates go through that. And that's a really good way of really sussing out if somebody actually matches their values and really it does a good job more deeply understanding how that person's operated throughout their entire professional career. So you can pick up on trends and how they operate. And what else? I think in terms of how we've implemented this too, we the other process we use is we use the EOS framework. So that's employee operating system. That is also very focused on how you implement mission, vision, values, and culture within the company. So there are a lot of good tools within that we basically applied to the business. And then I also read this book called, oh shoot, I'm blanking on it right now. I'll have to go back to it, but it was a really good book on culture that really just opened my eyes to the different types of cultures your company can have.
Hmm.
And just quick explanation on that. There are 4 tiers of culture. So one tier is it's the lowest tier. It's life sucks. Second tier is my life sucks. Is I'm great and you're not. Fourth tier is we're great, and then fifth one is life is wonderful. So there are 5 tiers.
Hmm.
And so what was interesting about that is I realized I worked at a couple of different agencies prior to starting my own. I could recognize the kind of tiers of culture that those agencies had. And it's really, it's any type of company, it's different types of sports teams. And I think Chicago Bulls under Phil Jackson, that's the fifth tier where it's like life is wonderful. Like everything was flowing after a point. Whereas I think he came into the organization and he's trying to manage like all the different players. That was like a tier three, whereas I'm great, you're not. Like he had a lot
Mm.
of issues with Michael Jordan because Michael Jordan thought he was great. He wouldn't really work with the other players. Same thing with Dennis Rodman, but he had to get them all together to where they first believed that they were great. And then life was wonderful. They started winning championships, right? So it's like that book has a lot of cool, like very insightful hacks to how to start developing that culture and keep growing it into each next stage. So that's been a really good one for me too, in terms of building out the team.
I think that's fascinating, specifically in the agency suite. How large is your team now? What's the size of the team?
Yeah. So it's 24 people.
Oh, yeah,
Not everyone is full time. So we got, I think, 6 part-time people, but
still,
18 people full time.
yeah. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
humming along. And I think the key thing right there, and like you mentioned, it's a constant evolution of how to address the team. And also, you're almost becoming a coach for the individual contributors of the team. Is how do I help them develop in their role in their future and align with the mission, vision, and the values?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think with understanding that you need to bring that mission, vision, values in at like 7 people, that I think it's each, I think there's a rule around it too, but I think it's each 7 people you bring in, you have to restructure how the team operates, how they communicate, how people work with each other,
Hmm.
how you build out teams. And so with each kind of growth in just a couple of people, you really have to restructure the agency, which is really interesting. It's been very difficult. And we grew, I think, relatively fast. We went from 2.5 years old.
Oh,
First year was me. Yeah.
dang.
Yeah. So first year is me and a couple of freelancers. Second year is me and some full-time people. And then this year it's 24 people.
Oh, dude, that's exciting. Yeah, when I was
Yeah.
helping as a COO and it was 7 and we did 21 in less than a year, and then also helping another in-house. I would agree that I think the more people you add on, the more you have to change. But I think it's more about figuring out different roles in managers versus directors and then making sure that you can have everyone accountable. It's an interesting art, leadership, and it's not that there's one answer that fits it all. I did want to ask, you seem like you're very driven and have high standards and expect a lot of the people that work with you. And I think I do the same. There's something that you mentioned about someone that you worked with in the past that helped you see and change your perspective around high standards and hard work. And as you answer, what does that view look like? But how do you apply that with the team now and making sure that you can be set high expectations, but also not make them feel like you're breathing down their neck? Because I think there's a fine line between that personality style and leadership.
Yeah. It's a great question. Okay. So there's a couple of kind of bullet points I'll throw out there and I'll double click into each. So one is really, and is what you're speaking to, understanding right people, right seats. And so that was a really important thing for me because I think for in the past, I've tried to put the wrong person in a seat and maybe they're good at something else, but I was like, hey, this person's really good at this thing. They should be a manager now. And then they were really bad at managing people.
Hmm.
And then I therefore thought they weren't good, but it turns out they were actually just good at doing the one thing. So really understanding that kind of dynamic. I think another thing is good expectations and at the front end. So what we have now with our team is we have a job scorecard and we have SMART goals. Job scorecard is basically we work on with the individual to identify what are the three key things that they do for their job and then how to measure it. And then on a weekly basis, we go back on our one-on-ones and we basically go check on this data here in terms of how they're doing against these key three items that they do for their job. Goals is basically, it's really 3 to 5 goals they have for the next 90 days. And then it's these kind of like more task based goals where they're trying to make either they're trying to contribute to the company or make their job like easier or better or basically improve themselves. And so what I found is set the expectation with the job scorecard and the SMART goals, and then trust that they can get it done and just work with them to identify these and then check in with them. But I think if you give them too much direction, if you give them like very like detailed to-do lists to do every day, if you're constantly checking in with them or chasing people, one is it creates a micromanagement atmosphere. But then two, it creates a problem where that person then is dependent on you to tell them what to do.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's much better, yeah, just to set the bigger top level goals, allow them just to execute, right? You work on the plan with them and then you let them go execute on the plan. And then the second thing is working on those goals and those metrics with them too. So it's not just my perspective, right? It's not like you have to be doing this and this is my standard for you. I work on it in a more collaborative
Hmm.
aspect with that person to develop that together. So it's a shared insight on what they actually should be doing. I think another thing is there's a lot we do in terms of how we communicate and how we prioritize projects. This is also taken from EOS, but we have something called like an L10 meeting
Hmm.
that we use with our leadership team. The L10 is also then used for individual teams. So we have a L10 for creative, we have an L10 for media buying. Within the L10 structure, I'm constantly driving home the importance of just prioritizing the right things, just making sure that there's a good culture within the agency around really identifying the highest impact things they could be working on and prioritizing those things and letting other things frankly drop if they're just not as big of an impact. That kind of like constant, I'd say, reiteration of that process for working throughout the agency has allowed for people to more independently just understand how to prioritize. And so I don't have to go back and be like, this is a big agenda for the week.
Yeah.
Instead, the teams and their kind of isolated breakout L10s are kind of understanding what they need to prioritize. And it's still, I would say, a work in progress, but the idea is it bubbles up
Yeah.
from below. So whatever the leadership team is executing on has been bubbled up from like respective team L10s and things like that. So I think that's work. But look, I'll be honest with you. I'd still really struggle with my expectations versus how the team
Oh
executes.
yeah.
And I think the other big challenge I have, and you probably know this, is as a business owner, you have so much more urgency in what you believe needs to get done
Oh
than
yeah.
an employee does. An employee just 9 to 5, you check out. And I have some employees that do work very long hours and they're very dedicated. So that's not speaking for all of them, but some of them, it's just very tough for me. But I had to recognize that's the difference. That's why being a business owner versus an employee, it's a very big difference in terms of your kind of sense of urgency. Like I feel like every morning I wake up with a gun to my head. It's like when an employee wakes
Oh
up
my
and they're like, "Oh,
gosh.
I have to get this report out."
No, I know that. That's the nature of performance advertising, and that's why it's not for everyone. But no, and I think there's a lot of wisdom
Yeah.
there. So you do the leaderships with your direct reports, and they do them with their direct reports for the scorecard weekly and the Sparkle for the quarter.
Yeah.
Okay, and that all has to channel through whatever your mission is for that quarter to accomplish, so that everyone's working in sync. Oh, that's pretty sweet.
Yep.
That's a pretty good structure. But yeah, no, there's the framework. The way that you laid it out is Very well thought out. And I think the key thing, again, going back to the art, like there is a significant art in leadership for you to show up to the best of your ability to empower others, but then also getting them to have that leadership or that owner's mentality, which may not always happen, but I think it's part of the process, and just ensuring that they're performing above standard from what the client can see. Because there's a level the client just can't see the difference in performance of what you would do versus what the team would do. As long as it's above that performance level and you're always like tracking to get up, you should be in a steady pace.
And it's funny too, because we have great relationships with their clients. And I think in terms of how we face our clients, it's just a radical difference from what they've experienced with other agencies.
Hmm.
Like we're extremely proactive. Our reporting that we have like biweekly calls where we go over a lot of insights on campaign performance, a lot more detailed than what other agencies have done with them in the past. And our overall just rapport with their clients is really strong. However, yeah, on the back end and the agency side of things, I'm just constantly, I want to say the team is good. Like we're performing really well. We've scaled because of that. I feel like you always just, I don't know. There's always something that can be improved.
Oh, that's good. It's
Um,
always improving mindset. No, I love it. How, for our listeners out there, where's the best place for people to one, thank you for being on and learn a little bit more about what you're up to?
but yeah, if you honestly just LinkedIn. So Hal Smith, if you search Hal Smith and then LinkedIn, you can find me there. I'm starting to post content pretty consistently. So that's the best place to reach out to me. Outside of that, you can reach out to me on Twitter. So my handle is how the number 4 ads. So how 4 ads. You can always check out our website at 8thstreetdigital.co. So .co.
Sweet. I will put those links in the show notes. Hal, thanks for being on again, man.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview, please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there, you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. 90% of all of these resources are not behind any email opt-ins. So you can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.